I'm divorcing you because I have a real family. I'm relieved to finally get rid of you.
What are you talking about?
She gave me kids, unlike you, who can't even keep yourself neat, let alone have kids. I have a family worth protecting, a well-kept woman, and our adorable child.
Oh, I see. Well, you'll regret this.
I'll never regret it.
For 10 years, I dedicated myself to taking care of my mother-in-law, Sylvia. I was exhausted and worn out, but my husband left me right in front of all the relatives during Sylvia's funeral. But thanks to Sylvia's will, he's about to experience a living hell. I'm Cordelia. I'm a 35-year-old housewife who married George 12 years ago. For the first 2 years, we both had incomes, but then Sylvia fell ill. I quit my job to move into my in-laws' home and take care of her. Their home was old and not suitable for caregiving. We had proposed renovating it into a 2-family home, but George said, "That's a waste of money. Let's save for our future children." Being young and just 2 years into our marriage, I thought, if I try hard enough, we won't need a renovation. But caregiving was physically demanding. I had no time to worry about my looks or manners. I think the only reason I persevered was that I had a good relationship with my in-laws. Initially, they were planning to hire a professional caregiver. George, however, pushed his opinion. If Cordelia takes care of Mom, it will be less stressful for her and save money. When I started caregiving, Sylvia would often ask me, "Are you okay with this? If George is forcing you, I can talk to him for you." Thankfully, Sylvia preferred doing as much as she could by herself. I took care of shopping, meal prep, cleaning, and yard work. I always felt a warmth in my heart for my in-laws, Sylvia and Ted. When I was gardening, Sylvia would make tea for me, and Ted would share tips on taking care of the yard. Losing my parents early in life made me really appreciate them. A while after we started living with my in-laws, George got a big job and started coming home late, even staying overnight at the office. His parents started saying, "What is George thinking, leaving the care of his parents to his wife while he's never home?" As George began to be away even on weekends for work, I once suggested, "If you work this much, you'll ruin your health. Sylvia doesn't need as much help as we thought, and I can get a part-time job." George responded condescendingly, "You've only worked full-time for a year or two. You won't make much with a part-time job. It's better for me to keep working, even if it's a bit much." He even added, "Mom and Dad might be going out of their way to make things easier for you, and you're not even concerned." I was quite annoyed, but thought he must be stressed and tired from work, so I apologized and ended the conversation. With lots of free time, I studied caregiving on my own and did some minor DIY renovations for it, consulting Ted. Years went by and Sylvia's condition gradually worsened. Eventually, I was spending all my time caring for her. Ted used to help but had back issues. One day, Sylvia bashfully asked me, "Cordelia, would you mind helping me with the bathroom and shower? It's a bit embarrassing to ask Ted." I had always admired their relationship, so I agreed to make Sylvia as comfortable as possible. Meanwhile, George rented a place near his office saying, "I can't relax at home, and the commute is killing me." He barely came back home. My in-laws started advising me, "Cordelia, leave that idiot soon. We're sorry you got stuck with our foolish son." But I chose to stay, telling them, "I may have lost respect for George as a husband, but I consider you two like my real parents, and I want to help." We all started crying, touched by each other's sentiments. George, who came home once in a while, would sarcastically sigh upon seeing me and complain, "Why are you dressed like that? And the house is a mess." I'm dressed this way because it's easier to care for Sylvia, and the house is just as clean as before with Ted's help. "Don't make Dad help. Why are you even living here if you're making him do the work?" You say that, but this is a big house. Cleaning it every day by myself is, ugh.
I didn't realize you'd be this lazy. I was giving you extra money for living expenses because I thought you were doing a good job with caregiving. That's going to change next month.
Wait a minute, why would you do that?
Because you're not doing your job when it comes to taking care of Mom. If you slack off on that, I'll divorce you.
George said this, ignoring anything I had to say. He just spoke his piece and went back to his own home. Originally, the money George gave for living expenses wasn't enough for my in-laws, and Ted had been making up the difference. George's announcement is a big blow to me. That night, I was wondering how to convince George otherwise. Ted noticed and asked me,
Is something wrong?
I hesitated, but decided to tell the truth that the situation was out of my control. Actually, George told me he's cutting our living expenses because he thinks I'm not working hard enough here. I was thinking about how to persuade him.
Slacking off? You? That's impossible. We're comfortable in our own home thanks to you. Don't worry about the money.
But you're already helping us out, Ted.
I couldn't stand the idea of us living off that foolish son's money anyway. We have plenty of savings, we'll be fine.
As I looked into it, Ted indeed had ample assets and we wouldn't have any financial issues. I decided to take his word for it and give up on talking to George. But then, one day, Ted suffered a stroke and passed away. At the funeral, I was confronted by George's sister, Roseanne, who shocked me with her words. I'm inheriting this house, so please leave. What? No way! As I was at a loss for words, George intervened.
What do you mean inheriting the house? Dad hardly had any money left, and I should also have a right to inherit the house.
Well, I'm leaving all the cash to you, George, and taking this old dingy house for myself.
Even if we sell it, it won't fetch more than the cash.
Roseanne's words silenced George, and that was the end of the inheritance talk. Within a few days of the funeral, we were kicked out of the house. Sylvia and I moved into a place that Roseanne had prepared for us, almost as if it was her last act of kindness. The new place was a condo. As I stood in front of our new home, Roseanne told me the truth. I'm sorry for leaving everything to you up until now. Dad actually told me everything and I was making plans. But before I could act on them, Dad passed away. That's why I had to talk to you in that way. What do you mean? Moving into this fully accessible condo has clearly made taking care of Sylvia a whole lot easier. Most of Dad's inheritance went into buying this place. He put it in Mom's name so she'd be secure no matter what happened to him. He was about to explain all this to you, but then he got sick. I'm sorry we couldn't talk about it sooner. What should I do now? If you're up for it, I'd love for you to continue taking care of Mom here. We'll pay you for caregiving, of course. And if you're tired of it, that's fine too. I know you've been reluctant, but Dad set aside money for all the caregiving you've done so far. Hearing Roseanne's words, I broke down in tears. I had no idea Ted went to such lengths. And here I am, unable to even thank him. Don't be silly! You've been holding down the fort, taking care of our parents all by yourself, while not even divorcing that idiot of a brother I have. Roseanne hugged my shoulders and smiled. Want to come in? Later, Roseanne told me in detail how Ted had bought the condo and transferred it to Sylvia's name through a living will. Apparently, Ted missed his chance to tell me because he was being cautious around George. I then told her I considered them my real family and I wanted to care for Sylvia as a way of giving back. We agreed, and so began our new life. I started looking for certifications I could earn from home and continue to take care of Sylvia. But ever since Ted's passing, Sylvia's health gradually worsened. We even took some stress-free trips hoping it would help. I hadn't heard from George since the funeral, and the monthly allowance had stopped. Once, Sylvia tearfully apologized, saying, I'm so sorry, Cordelia. You've wasted your life taking care of me. Sylvia, I've told you before. I'm grateful to be able to take care of you. Please don't apologize anymore, I responded, aiming to make the most of our remaining time together. Despite our efforts, Sylvia's health didn't improve. She was admitted to the hospital and passed away a few days later. At her funeral, I encountered George, who had faded from my memory. He showed up with a garishly made-up woman and said,
Thanks for the caregiving. I was only with you for Mom's sake. Now I'm finally free. I've got a real family now. A new woman and child. I'm divorcing you.
What do you mean?
I've got a kid, something you could never give me. And now I've got a family to protect.
Oh, okay. But you'll regret this.
Regret? Not a chance.
George was grinning when he said that to me and was about to leave the funeral home. Just then, Roseanne said, "You know, we're reading Mom's will with the lawyer later, right? Don't you want to know what it says?" The woman with him, barely hiding her smirk, intertwined her arm with George's and said, "We might as well stick around and listen." So off we went to my in-laws' house. Once all the family was gathered, the will was read. It stated that the inheritance would go to Roseanne and me. George, hearing this, blew up.
What's the meaning of this? I can understand my sister's name being here, but why is Cordelia's name listed and not mine, her own son?
He grabbed my hair in anger. Roseanne's husband quickly intervened, and the woman George brought along spoke up. "So there's a will. That doesn't mean there isn't something for everyone, right?" She looked at the lawyer, still smirking.
George, you are disqualified from inheriting anything.
The room went silent.
What are you talking about?
The lawyer continued.
George, didn't you promise to take care of Sylvia so she'd leave you more in her will? You even threatened her and kicked her bed to ensure she wouldn't change it.
I felt the blood drain from my face. You did what? That's unthinkable.
I never did such a thing. Stop lying. Are you trying to scam me out of my mother's inheritance?
George yelled back at me. Then the lawyer calmly said,
No lies here. We have evidence.
He played audio of George threatening Sylvia and a video of him kicking her bed. The footage came from a camera that Ted and I had set up to make sure Sylvia didn't have an accident. Roseanne whispered, Dad only removed his footage so it wouldn't trouble you, Cordelia.
Based on these pieces of evidence, it's clear that George attempted to fraudulently influence the creation of the will through threats and intimidation. Therefore, he is disqualified from inheriting.
But we have kids. This has nothing to do with them, right? The woman interjected again. At her words, one of the male relatives shouted,
Can you outsiders please keep quiet?
But without flinching, the woman retorted, I am no outsider. I have his child. But that child was conceived during our marriage, so it's a child born out of an affair, correct? Upon hearing my stern inquiry, the woman paused for a moment, then glared at George. We've known about your relationship for quite some time. We even hired a private investigator, so we have all the evidence we need. We'll be seeking a substantial settlement from both of you. Oh, and by the way, you haven't been keeping up with the support payments, so expect to hear from us on that as well. Hearing the lawyers and my words, the family turned condemning eyes towards George. One male relative yelled,
Get out! What do you think of your wife and mother?
George, feeling the weight of the situation, left without making eye contact with anyone. A few days later, the divorce was finalized through the lawyer, and I received the settlement as planned. We also sent a detailed report along with videos of Sylvia being threatened and the reading of the will to the woman's family home. It turns out that Sylvia's family was quite prominent, and George had been pushing me into caregiving for her with her inheritance in mind. While I regret not recognizing what kind of man he was sooner, I remain thankful for the time spent with my wonderful in-laws. George and his accomplice had been living under the assumption that they would inherit something, but now they're drowning in debt due to the claims against them. Moreover, after receiving the videos we sent, the woman's parents were furious and severed ties with her, leaving her with no one to turn to. Apparently, Roseanne and the other relatives have been contacted, but needless to say, they've declined any involvement. Fortunately, George was unaware of the condominium where I spent my last days with Sylvia, so there's been no direct harm to me. Although I could live off Sylvia's inheritance, I've found myself wanting to work and am now employed at a caregiving facility. Roseanne joked with me saying, You've just finished taking care of Mom and now you're starting a caregiving job? Regardless, I'm living a fulfilling life every day.